let's just do it. Zach Reed from the Dynasty Dummies podcast recently posted something on Twitter about Elijah Moore being a potential breakout, and it rose an interesting question for me, so I went and dug into it just a little bit. So let's talk about who we shouldn't be drafting in the top 24 in 2022.
Do you have the time to listen to me grind? Take down the film watchers and nerds all at once.
I'm playing around with some stuff on my YouTube videos. I keep meaning to ask. I'm fading background music in and out, so let me know if there's a preference. And the introduction at the start, I kind of like it, but then sometimes I feel like it kind of just distracts from the content. Let me know what you think. Should I keep up with that standard intro with the Zach Reed song coming in, or background music, yay or nay? I'd really be interested to know what you think. Now, a question that occurred to me while thinking about Elijah Moore and Zach Reed's love of Elijah Moore is, I like Elijah Moore. I like Elijah Moore a lot. Me and Zach both agreed on the Dynasty Grind, which live streams every Wednesday at 9:30 on YouTube and Twitch, with Dynasty Outhouse, by the way. Was we expected his ADP to drop after the draft because we thought the Jets were going to add some company, and they added a lot of company between Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson. And so now would be the time to trade for him. And that's really what's happened. So it's a really good time to go get Elijah Moore. He's just falling out of the top 24 in Dynasty ADP in terms of overall ranks. But I hadn't really spoken about him recently, especially when doing my breakout research. Not because he doesn't have a good signal that he could be a fairly common breakout this year, because he was outside the top 6, essentially. And we tend to get between 3 and 6 breakouts every year at wide receiver, and this is a year where I'm expecting fewer breakouts, and so that narrows the pool of players I'm actually looking for anyway. But the question that occurred to me was, who shouldn't we be drafting in the top 24? Who are all the fools and the idiots drafting earlier when, you know who I like to be breakouts this year, right? I mean, you know, right? No? Well, I got some videos. No, but T. Higgins and CeeDee Lamb are both the most likely, and I think they're essentially the same bet, but they're both ranked inside the top 12. And the 3 that I really like, because they're outside the top 24 right now, are Amon-Ra St. Brown, Darnell Mooney, and Devontae Smith. And if you groaned, like, I don't think they have that upside, that's probably why they're outside the top 24. But that's where value comes from. But that goes back to Zach's question, like, who are we drafting so poorly in the top 24 when we have all these obvious values? Well, the first thing I did was I went to DLF ADP and I sorted by breakouts and also DLF ranks. And what I found is, if you remove the rookies from DLS position ranks, all of those players I just mentioned, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devontae Smith, definitely Elijah Moore, and Darnell Mooney, are top 24 wide receivers, which leads into some stuff we talked about before, where top 24 wide receivers seem to be 46 deep. If you go and trade for players in any dynasty league, I find a lot of players ranked outside the top 24. The person rostering them kind of wants top 24 value for usually justifiable reasons, because we don't like to cut our face off to spite our nose, or the other way around, one or the other. And we know there are breakout potentials, even if we're not ranking them as breakouts. ADP is actually pretty smart. It's a baseline. You should take ADP and try and build off of it rather than start from scratch and project who's going to be the top 24. But ADP does a good enough job that you can just read it for potential errors. And it was interesting to me that this year, the clear errors of players who won't finish inside the top 24, which doesn't necessarily mean they're not worth drafting inside the top 24 in Dynasty. Value exists. But it's because we're drafting rookies, essentially. We're drafting rookies in the top 24. Now, there are a few exceptions, which we could call quote-unquote bad decisions with top 24 wide receiver positional ranks in Dynasty right now, just because they have lower breakout potential than the players I just mentioned on my 3-person list who are outside the top 24. I think that makes them arguably worse picks inside the top 24, but again, Dynasty is Dynasty, and it's not like their value is going to drop off, and all of them are very good players who I do have a lot of hope for in the future. They just have less potential to break out this year based on my common breakout formula, which is just based on history. To be fair, it's not a formula, it's not a model, it's just based on what normally happens. It's pretty good. And that's Rashad Bateman. I hate his ADP, and I always have, even though I've liked the player's profile from college and even his performance in the NFL last year. As a rookie, I think it was great. I just think his potential of reaching top 12 this year is less than several players being drafted below it, and all of them are very good players. Now, outside of Rashad Bateman, there's always Judy, who's being drafted just inside the top 24 per DLF positional ranks. And remember, if you remove the rookies, they all scoot up a bit, so he actually has a high level of value, although I think you'd find it hard to get a single 23 first for any of them right now, especially as the news of the value of the 23 class continues to spread throughout the Dynasty community. But still, he's being drafted inside the top 24 right now. And I think he and Rashad Bateman are probably the two lower odds bets to at least have higher ceilings to players being drafted below them. So one of my takeaways from this exercise led on from a question I had based on something Zach Reed said, which I believe in, is I like a lot of players being drafted inside the top 24, and I don't largely disagree with them, especially when you adjust for the fact that rookies have potential value, and there's at least going to be 2 or 3 of them definitely pay off on drafting them in the top 24 in a startup right now. Cole Shaftak also chimed in on that thread on Twitter to say, you've just identified, or I have identified an area in the draft that I'm particularly interested in. While I think that's a valid observation and definitely is probably one of the key takeaways from this kind of exercise, what strikes me about a lot of Dynasty ranks and Dynasty trade advice and values and who you want in the next season is that we more commonly think about the startup draft, whereas the difference between Dynasty and redraft is like 95 to 98% of all play takes place after that. Like, most of your leagues, most of my leagues are done started up. I'm several years into them. The idea that the only thing I should talk about breakouts and value from the perspective of a startup draft, while valid and definitely worthwhile, I just mentioned it, hopefully you took that away if you're doing a startup, but it's also, we should convert that into what does it mean for players already in the league. The startup's done started. And that's how I normally talk about values and playing for next season. That led onto a few videos I've done recently about how bad 2022 looks from a Dynasty perspective. Because most of the values, or most of the more likely breakouts, which are the category we get wrong more often in Dynasty, going back through DLF ADP, players who finish inside the top 12 and inside the top 24 are more commonly breakouts than they are repeats or they are returns. Players who've been inside the positional ranks but didn't the previous year. So breakouts are who we miss, but based on the trends from 2021, we know breakouts should be less common. In fact, we should see more repeats and probably the same amount of returns. 2 players inside the top 12, 4 players inside the top 24. So we shouldn't be expecting more breakouts. So ultimately, the takeaway I get from this for how to play in your leagues is if you have some of these rookies, or if you have Rashad Bateman, and if you have Judy, I would try trading back, theoretically, if the person in your league is following ADP or is in line with ADP pretty closely. I would try trading them back to Darnell Mooney or Devontae Smith or Amon-Ra St. Brown and get a plus. Any trade where I got those players and a plus would be great for any rookie this year, apart from maybe Burks, because he's more wide receiver 1, so I believe he's the most likely to be one of those 3 that eventually is worth this kind of value. And get a plus on top of Amon-Ra St. Brown, Darnell Mooney, or Devontae Smith, whoever I can. The thing is, breakouts have risk. Last year, we were talking about players with this level of upside in Cooper Kupp, who I really should have caught more than I did. We mentioned it, but I didn't put him on like a list like I did with the breakouts. But we caught Deebo Samuel, Marcus Brown, who finished inside the top 24 for the first time. And we also caught Deontay Johnson from my article last year talking about third-year breakouts. I should expect some regression, by the way, because that's hitting way too hard. Those trades I just mentioned, there is risk in them. Amon-Ra St. Brown and Devontae Smith, they could bust, let alone not repeat inside the top 24, let alone not inside the top 12, which means there isn't a great value this year. Or the players with the most upside as breakouts, which we get more commonly wrong, and the ones we should typically be looking for outside of Dynasty or DLF ADP, are actually correctly valued. Now, there are a few exceptions. Brandon Ayuk, for example, is very, very likely to get inside the top 24 this year. He's ranked below all of these players, and having had Brandon Ayuk on my team, I found him very difficult to trade for. I think you could easily draft or trade for Brandon Ayuk right now at a really good value. There are other good sources of values every year, and that's the repeat column. This year, we are strongly projecting a lack of repeats by players who have previous top 24 and top 12 seasons. I'll try and throw up a list here so you get an idea of it. But Cortland Sutton, as opposed to Jerry Judy, is being drafted below Jerry Judy, and he would be a repeat rather than a breakout, which would fit the trends of 2022 a lot better. And in fact, I think he's slightly more likely, and yet being drafted below him, to break out in 2022. So I think there are a few exceptions where there are players that we could get a value on, but I'm not sure they have. I'm not sure we can easily identify players who have that top 12 upside, who are potential breakouts. Now, they're going to exist. Those are the ones we miss on, but they are not easy to identify this year. The most likely are the most valued, and that's the problem I'm having with 2022 wide receivers this year. They're not inappropriately valued. Now, ADP is usually pretty sharp, but you can usually find some level of upside in the breakout category outside the top 24, especially when you adjust for the number of rookies inside the top 24. This year, no. I think this year, the way to get an edge on ADP is to recognize that repeats, and also repeats from last year, whether they finish inside the top 12 or finish inside the top 24, they're more likely, I think, to repeat this year than what happened last year. A regression in accuracy in ADP for that very reason. Also an increased number of running back breakouts. So Deontay Johnson was a top 12 wide receiver last year, being drafted outside the top 12. Now, he's not a breakout, and I can see why he couldn't repeat inside the top 12, but we probably should lean into that just because of the trends of repeats being more likely this year. Brandon Ayuk is another example, or it's another reason why Brandon Ayuk could be pretty good value right now. Cortland Sutton as well. We've also got players like Jarvis Landry and Michael Thomas because of injury concerns in Michael Thomas's case, and Allen Robinson falling well outside the top 36 wide receivers, who are probably better trades if you're looking for upside because they could repeat at a high level of production instead of just finishing inside the top 24, which is usable and useful and utilous as flex players as well as just wide receiver 2s and 3s, but ultimately doesn't give you that big winning edge that the top 12 can. So, I wanted to group together a bunch of the things I'm talking about with breakouts and the patterns of 2022, because when I say 2022 sucks, I'm not sure it quite translates. 2022 is going to be a great year to watch football. I'm sure there's going to be lots of exciting stuff. Again, there's plenty of value on the floor. You can trade those rookies and also those couple of players, Rashad Bateman and Jerry Judy, who are being ranked probably a little too high for the upside expectation we could reasonably have on them, back into Amon-Ra St. Brown and Darnell Mooney and Devontae Smith, and maybe get a little plus if the person in your league is close to in line with ADP. There's also repeat players who are drafted well outside of that and should offer much better value. Essentially, going into 2022, to try and win, you should be trying not to give up 2023 first value. Instead, you should be trying to trade back into those players who are older, more likely to repeat or return, and slightly discounted because of their draft capital and Amon-Ra St. Brown's, or an overread, I think, of how much we could know about players' situations in terms of Darnell Mooney and also Devontae Smith, for that matter. But yeah, in terms of hunting upside through common trends, I think it's going to be difficult. I think the breakouts are really going to matter this year. Are not going to fit a lot of common trends. And also, especially at wide receiver, we should probably expect less of them to happen this year. So lean heavily on returns, leave heavily on repeats, which usually is where 60% of top 12 and top 24 players come from anyway. So we should always be leaning heavily towards the repeats and returns. But this year in particular, we should have less impetus, we should have less desire to spend future capital on potential breakouts, instead trying to trade back into them for those few players who might be overvalued going to 2023. Anyway, I'll throw the thread in the description as well, just so you can see some of the images that I didn't put in the video, or if I forgot to put in the video, and some of the comments, because other people have other ideas, and Cole Safchek's definitely someone to check out. And you should also go check out what Zach Reed was saying about Elijah Moore, because anyway, let me know what you think. Thanks very much for checking it out. Hello, new subscribers. Really appreciate it. Hopefully you haven't already unsubscribed. Really appreciate it. See you again in the next one. I don't have a sign off. Hey, thanks for checking out another video. If you could like, subscribe, comment, that'd all be great. But also check out the rest of the channels, or follow my Patreon link to see what I'm up to over there. And the Linktree link, I guess, is going to take you to easy access to my podcast, the articles I'm writing over there at DLF, as well as most of the other things I'm up to. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks very much.